G'day mate, 40 here. So I'm listening on Audible to the Michael Wolff book, biography of Rupert Murdoch, and near the beginning he talks about walking into a TV studio. Michael Wolff describes this scene, and he's immediately buttonholed by Jonathan Alter, lead writer for Newsweek, a man described as, embodying journalistic rectitude. And without any preamble, without any hi or hello, Jonathan Alter, who's just heard the news that Rupert has agreed to a whole series of sit-down interviews with Michael Wolff for this biography, Jonathan Alter says to the author Michael Wolff, "Hope you're really going to screw him." So this reminds me of people on the liberal left who describe, vast swaths of the world as just trash. There's just inevitable in-group, out-group dynamic to the way that people relate to each other, where out-groups are regarded as varying degrees of less than human. So Jonathan Alter and the journalistic establishment wants to stand up for journalistic rectitude by operating with the opposite of journalistic rectitude against Rupert Murdoch. It's like the adage, no freedom for the enemies of freedom, or no freedom for the enemies of democracy, or anyone who wants to ruin, besmirch, befuddle, threaten, destroy our liberal left world. Right? No human rights for them. Just nothing but all-out war. And so why would people advocate for things that seemingly the very opposite of what they pretend to stand for? Because of the situation, right? Despite the best of intentions, the noblest of motives, the most sublime of hero systems, we all down deep find people who are different from us. There's a little part of us, no matter how we try to suppress and squelch it, still thinks that people who are quite different from us, not fully human. So Jonathan Alter, in the name of journalistic rectitude, is saying to Michael Wolff, with regard to his biography of Rupert Murdoch and his guise of obtaining interviews with Rupert Murdoch, I hope you're really going to screw him. And most of the time when mainstream media talks to dissidents, if the dissident view is considered anathema by the powers that be in the media, that interview is going to be done with the express purpose of just screwing the dissident over. I remember in 1993, I was the Placer County chairman for this school choice ballot initiative, and a reporter from the Auburn Journal came over to interview me, and I had things that I wanted to say, making the case for school choice, but he already had the story written. It really didn't matter what I had to say. He already had everything down. And that's kind of a disturbing part of being interviewed often, is when you encounter a journalist who already has the story written. They already have their preconceptions, and their brain is running down a track. Right? When your brain's running down a track, you're essentially impervious to evidence. You're not going to take in anything new. You're not going to be open in an interview to hearing anything. Your brain is on a track, right? Or your brain is just full up with all the elements of your story, and you're just looking to slot something in that you've already created space for. Now, most journalistic interviews, in my experience, are not like this. too many, I don't know, maybe a quarter of them in my experience. But it is very common to encounter people whose brains just run on tracks. Right? They're not going to deviate. They're not going to leave the track. They're just going to keep motoring down that particular railway line, no matter the evidence, no matter the situation, no matter what happens, no matter what they hear. Their brain's just going to keep running down certain tracks. So I heard a good line in a Harvard symposium on the Middle East. It was recorded about 5 days ago, and it quoted the Jordanian foreign minister as saying that Hamas didn't create the situation in the Middle East between the Israelis and the Arabs, that the situation created Hamas. But wow, that's a really pithy way of saying things. Now, of course, the Hamas attack on southern Israel did create the current Israeli invasion of Hamas, and did create the overwhelming necessity that Israelis would feel to invade Gaza and go on a rampage against Hamas, with the inevitable loss of civilian life as Hamas deliberately, hides among civilians like kindergartens and hospitals and schools. So, in one sense, the current war in Gaza was created by Hamas. Right? Hamas did create this current situation of crisis in the Middle East. But the Jordanian foreign minister is right that the Arab-Israeli conflict was not created by Hamas. The Arab-Israeli conflict created Hamas. Right? Hamas would not be Hamas without the Arab-Israeli conflict. On the other hand, because Hamas is so dedicated to the complete destruction of the Jewish state, all right, when you're dealing with an enemy who is dedicated to your destruction, all right, that limits your options. And so, as long as Hamas has remained stalwart in its complete commitment to the destruction of the Jewish state, that limits how the Jewish state can respond. Then when Gazans elect Hamas back in 2006, right, that puts the situation on railway tracks, and it can just kind of go down a certain track. Because back in 2004, 2005, right, when Israel withdrew from Gaza, there was talk about Gaza getting its own airport and its own port. And that didn't happen when Hamas got elected, because look at all the weaponry that Hamas has been able to amass without its own airport, without its own port. So just think, what they would have been able to do with their own airport, with their own port. So certain decisions get made, such as Gazans electing Hamas and Hamas wiping out the Palestinian PLA, Palestinian Authority, PA. And that put the Gaza-Israel situation on a railway track. It's just kind of inevitable. It's just going to keep moving down this track inevitably to the situation we're in right now. And so there's certain choices that we make in life or are made around us, and the die is cast. The situation is set, that we're all on a railway car that's just inevitably rattling down the railway line. There's no way to get off. Because as long as Hamas is dedicated to the destruction of Israel, and 200,000 Israelis have to be evacuated from their homes, right, Israel has no choice but to go into Gaza, no matter the cost in civilian lives, to destroy Hamas as a governing and military infrastructure. So Autistic Merit says, YouTube persists in defaulting its top messages in spite of my selecting all messages each and every time. Yes. So with many forms of social media and many forms of life, right, no matter how much we protest, right, the railway train is going down the tracks. And we can select all messages, but the algorithm's not going to change, right? The world's not going to change for us, right? We have to change and adapt to the reality of the world. The reality of the world is that social media companies have become strongly incentivized to limit many kinds of speech. Probably number one incentive is to make it, the platform more advertising friendly. So I really like Kick. All right, Kick has very lax moderation, much more free speech. Downside of Kick is that it's largely funded by gambling. So I'm not a big fan of gambling, or don't have much of a desire to promote gambling. On the other side, right, you get more free speech on Kick. So I've been profiled, written about, a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen times. I was on the cover of the Jewish Journal of Los Angeles. I was profiled in Rolling Stone, Online Journalism Review, Los Angeles Daily News, LA Times, etc., etc. Now, most of the times I've been profiled and written about was a focus of a master's paper at Stanford University. But the point is, most times that I've been written about, it's not as my narcissistic self would wish, because I'm just so inherently wonderful. It's because of something I represent, because of a role that I play in creating a current situation. So I started blogging almost every day in July 3, 1997. So I became one of those young online disruptors, like Matt Drudge and Harry Knowles, etc. So it was the situation that in large part propelled my media coverage and a very low-key C-list media celebrity such as it was. And when the situation changed, right, much of that coverage disappeared. So in September of 2001, right, the Jewish Journal of Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Magazine, and the Los Angeles Times all had major in-depth profiles of me ready to go. But then September 11 happened, and all the profiles got spiked for other topics because the situation had changed. So it was no longer an important situation. Young disruptive forces on the internet, upending the way that various industries operate. No longer such an important story once the Twin Towers came down, and the US, invades Afghanistan and then prepares and goes into a war in Iraq. All right, look for profiles don't matter anymore. I don't matter anymore on a media level for probably 2 or 3 years after that, because the situation's changed. Anyway, main point is, I was really struck by that Jordanian foreign minister's comment. Hamas did not create the situation created Hamas. And yes, it's only partially accurate. Hamas did create the immediate situation we're in, but it's the wider, deeper, longer situation that we're in that's created Hamas. Yeah, my status was the real victim of 9/11. my profiles all jumped out the top floor. I was listening to the sublime sound of Amazing Grace when the notification for this stream flashed. The situation changed. With great sacrifice, I came over. So, Rupert Murdoch regarded buying the Wall Street Journal as, the great crowning achievement of his newspaper career, but it was a financial disaster. So he was absolutely, ecstatic about gaining the Wall Street Journal, but he overpaid by about $3 billion. All right. So it's so funny how we all get ecstatic getting what we want, and then half the time it just crumbles to dust. And he thought he was going to be able to use the Wall Street Journal to destroy the New York Times. So it's now 15 years since Rupert took over the Wall Street Journal, 16 years. Like, how's that worked out? The New York Times is on much firmer footing now than it was back in 2007. The New York Times has something like 10 million subscribers. I think the Wall Street Journal has something like 2 million. Wall Street Journal used to be much more of a distinctive business newspaper. Now it's more of a general interest paper. I think it's definitely an inferior product than before Rupert Murdoch took it over, but it's not dramatically inferior, just moderately inferior. And given the changing economic situation with newspapers, I'm not sure that if Murdoch hadn't bought it out that it would be that much better than it is. Michael Wolff makes a good point that people who work for Rupert Murdoch tend to be among the happiest people in the news media. So most news media people don't seem particularly happy, but those who work for Murdoch are something of an exception. And it's a lot easier to be happy when you're not tied down by all sorts of nitpicking rules and principles of ethical conduct. All right, it's a lot easier to be called a hypocrite when you stand for things and you have commitments that transcend yourself. Rupert Murdoch essentially uses First Amendment attorneys to allow his employees the greatest possible latitude to say whatever they want, whether it's factual or not. So I find the Financial Times consistently more valuable than the Wall Street Journal. Damn, I'm trying to do a live stream here, guys, and the bloody trash man is really messing with my sound. So in this Michael Wolff book, he keeps calling the Wall Street Journal the second most important newspaper in the world. Is that still true? So I can't believe I spend about $180 a year to subscribe to the Financial Times. Far and away the most of any newspaper subscription. I spend about $12 a month to subscribe to the Sydney Morning Herald, $13 a month to subscribe to Apple News Plus. But there's just so many valuable articles in the Financial Times. They seem particularly keyed into the Biden administration. So if you want to know what's going on in the Biden administration, the Financial Times is probably the best source. To be continued.